it hasn't been too long ago we couldn't grow industrial hemp in the state of Colorado, and now we've got it right here. And we get to look at it, and we get to tour it, and we get to start really experimenting with it. And kind of why I got into this movement was because I was looking for a better way to build a house. I've been a carpenter for most of my life, so I figured there must be a better way, but as I started taking green code classes and things like that through the city of Fort Collins, I saw what we were doing to green up our houses. And what we were doing to green up our houses was we were putting more petroleum-based products into the house. We were adding more and more complicated systems to keep air from getting in and out of our houses. So what I noticed is that our plastic boxes started to get locked up tighter and tighter. And in that process, we started to have indoor mold problems. That's when chemical sensitivity syndrome really started happening, because we had indoor air pollutants and molds and things like that inside of our houses. We carry toxins on our clothing into our own house. And so that's what we breathe. And so when I found HempCrete, I found that it was different in that way. Sounds pretty cool having that reverb going, huh? Has anybody ever planned a festival this size before? Is it a little bit of work, or a lot of work, or it's a lot of work, isn't it? And so I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad that Veronica spent all of her time to put this together. So thanks, Veronica. Anyway, since I was a kid, I've been reading Mother Earth News and looking at Whole Earth Catalog, and we've had some solutions over the years, but in this day and age, there's very few solutions. Industrial hemp has a lot of solutions. And if our farmers are going to be successful, there better be people finding uses for it. And if there's not uses for the plant, and if we don't develop those uses, then it really doesn't do us much good to grow it. And you can ask some Canadian farmers that had some initial failures because there was no market yet, there was no processing, and so we've all got to kind of work together. We've got to integrate it correctly. So we're working to build homes with it. We're hoping that more and more farmers are going to grow enough of it so that we can build homes with it, and then we need people to help us process it and get it to the stage that we need it. And that's one of the things I'm going to talk about here today. Like I say, I'm a carpenter. I'm not a farmer. I'm not a hemp processor. I've learned how to use hemp to build houses with. But just this past week, I kind of got the idea that I ought to learn a little bit more about the actual processing of the hemp. And so I found a picture online of something called the hemp brake. And this is the old way to process it. The slaves Thomas Jefferson's slaves used to use this machine, and apparently they complained about that. So if your slaves complain, then it's probably pretty hard work. Anyway, this is a hemp brake, and I need some stock. So Veronica said I can use what's up here. So I hate to take down her nice display, but I need to find some hemp stock.
That's what it's there for. John, over here behind. Over here.
Oh, okay. Here's some. Thank you. Sorry, my bad. I'm not used to having this thing. So, all right. Well, so anyway, you know, there's all these different things, different ways to wrap the hemp and things like that. I'm looking for the inner part of the stalk or the herd. But the fiber people don't want me to just cut it up. They want to still have the fiber intact, so it takes a machine that does both of that. So now I showed up not even knowing if this was going to work. I had a couple of little stems from my private garden inside that I got to try this on, and it seemed to work okay on those.
No button. No switch.
This is how they do it. You can imagine, the main reason I brought this is because you'll see that this would be an awful lot of work. but it does the trick. It breaks it. Doesn't quite ruin the fiber. It's probably not too nice on it, but in the old days, this is all they had. And then they decided to make something a little bit better, which I'm glad they did, because I'm looking for the inner part of the stalk to build the houses with. It's called the herd. And there's just a little bit in this stalk, so different plants would produce more herd. And that's what we would be looking for, but that's about what it looks like after I get it out of that stalk there. But the fiber's still long, and so, you know, you could, well, I guess if you were, you know, you make a pair of underwear or something out of this. Now, you probably need to go through a lot more processing before it was comfortable enough to be down there. So after we get the herd, you know, this is what it is here. So you can imagine with this little processing machine how much it would take for me to build a little block like these samples I have here, or a whole house. So we need bigger time processing. And they exist, of course. You know, they got it in Europe and things like that. But what we need in Colorado is the ability to get it to where I need it to build houses with it, or to where the people that want the seed, they need the seed a certain way, and I need the herd a certain way. So now, after we've gotten the herd separated, or we bought the herds from somebody else, right now I get it out of Canada or the Netherlands or other places around the world that may or may not have it. It's really hard to get. It's hard to import, and it's expensive. But it is going to allow us to prove the concept by building small structures and blocks and tiny houses and things like that, and alternative building structures that actually have a permit. So when we take the herd, then we mix it with a lime-based binder, and we're going to be actually doing that over at my booth here after I finish my little discussion here. We'll be actually mixing up and making some little blocks, and you can see kind of how that works. But let me explain why I think it's a better way to build a house. You can see this block here. I've got framing here, so imagine that the house was framed up like we would normally do it. Except we don't need quite as much lumber. We can get away with less lumber when we build a thermal wall system. So it's all framed up, and then we cast it in place. We mix up the hemp, the lime, and the water, and then we build a formwork, and then we'll pour it inside of the wall cavity. And then we move those forms, and we do that again as we go from one part of the house to the other. But what we end up with is a thermal wall system that takes the place of the drywall, the insulation, the exterior boarding, house wrap, siding, caulk, paint. All those systems are replaced by one thermal wall system that's bio-based. It doesn't have chemicals in it. It's lime is technically caustic, but in this form, we got to wear masks when we work with it and things like that, but it's inert once we have it in the thermal wall system. So what that brings us is several advantages. Now, when I was out in Wisconsin taking my first Steve Allen class, he's an internationally recognized HempCrete instructor and wrote this book. I was out taking that class about 2.5 years ago, and 70,000 acres of my backyard was burning down while I was taking this class. The High Park fire up west of Fort Collins. And so one of my first questions was, is it fire resistant? And his Irish accent, oh, Jean, you could hardly burn it if you tried. And he directed me to his video online. He's got a video online where he takes a blowtorch and tries to burn it and does like a 10-minute test. And there may be actually a fire test video of me up online somewhere if you were likely to search for it. Anyway, you can hardly burn it. It's essentially a non-combustible material. And so in light of the High Park fire and thinking that we ought to build structures that don't burn is easy. But if it does burn, it'd be nice if it was not quite so toxic. And you guys might remember some of the other fires we've had down here. I specifically remember the Black Canyon fire down south of here a little ways. And my wife pointed out when those big homes were burning how black the smoke was. that was coming off of those houses. And that's not wood burning. That's not healthy stuff that you're seeing. That's black, toxic, oil-based type of things that are burning and melting when these houses burn. And you know, when we were in Fort Collins, we breathed a lot of that smoke, and you're breathing those toxins from those homes when they burn, whether or not it's yours or not. So it's going to benefit all of us if we start building our structures out of more bio-based materials in a lot of different ways. Now, it's more energy efficient and more comfortable, and I put those together because they kind of go hand in hand. Comfort level is what we're really looking for in homes. A lot of people say, no, we're looking for fancy archways and things like that. You know, well, no, comfort is really where it's all at. That's what my family will complain about drafts and things like that, more so than anything else. So, comfort level, how do we maintain that? Well, more constant year-round temperature. That also helps us with energy efficiency. So, but we don't want it to feel like a cave. We want it to feel more like a warm home. And HempCrete has some amazing qualities. It's breathable. So the best way to describe the breathability of the product is, when I was a kid, and you guys might have done this, has anybody ever tried like a plastic trash bag for a raincoat?
Yes.
Or some of those old slickers that were mostly plastic? And then you ride your bicycle or take a little jog, and what happens inside of that coat? You sweat. It feels real sticky, and it's very uncomfortable, isn't it? Well, it was about when I first moved to Colorado, I remember Gore-Tex came out, and it was probably a little while after that I could even afford a Gore-Tex jacket. They were super expensive, but it sounded like all the rage, and I finally got one. And man, you could ride your bicycle and run and all that stuff in your Gore-Tex breathable jacket. And breathable is the term that made that more comfortable. And so our homes, rather than being plastic bags or plastic boxes, think about the petroleum and the paint. You guys like low VOC paint? Do you know how they make it low VOC? More chemicals. So they actually do. They use more chemicals to stop the off-gassing of the other chemicals that they put in there. What we're going to use is a lime-based paint on this, and it's much more healthy, and you can actually make it yourself. Lime-based paint on the interior and the exterior. So the thermal wall system also provides energy efficiency. We speak of it in terms in the United States of R value. Everything's R value. So a piece of insulation is R19 that goes in between a 2x6 wall. But what we don't talk about is how the house performs as a whole. So when we build a standard house, we put 2x6s or 2x4s, 16 inches on center or 2 foot on center, and we build the whole house that way. And then we put a piece of insulation in between those only. And so every stud, you have less insulation than what you had in the wall cavity. And so you have what's called thermal bridging. That means that air can escape through the lesser part of the insulation. And so with our system, we eliminate the thermal bridging because we go all the way around the framework, creating more of what we like to refer to as a nest as opposed to a plastic box. So that's what we want to do. We want to build comfortable nests, ones that hold us and keep us warmer and cooler when we want to be. And HempCrete provides a lot of that. Now, also with the breathability, that also has to do with why it's more energy efficient. Passive solar homes utilize thermal mass. So the sun comes in the south windows on a passive solar home, and it hits stuff. The sun hits stuff. If it doesn't hit the thermal mass, if it doesn't hit the concrete, it doesn't heat it up, and so it's no good. And in fact, it's a negative if the sun doesn't hit it in a passive solar house. The only way it can grab the energy in a concrete wall or most bricks and things like that is the sun hits it directly. Hemp's a little bit different because it takes that moisture in with it. And so that moisture in a home is warm. It's warm from our breath, it's warm from our showers, it's warm from our cooking, it's warm from our wood stoves or other heating sources and things like that. And so when it takes on that heat, it takes it on warm and stores it inside of the moisture, and then slowly releases it back into the room. So that's kind of the short story of how that breathability actually has more than just that breathability factor. Now, has anybody seen the Bring It Home movie? Yeah? You guys have seen that? If not, man, check out at least the trailer is actually really good. It's almost as good as watching the whole thing as far as telling you about it. But Anthony Brenner, the architect that was featured on Bring It Home movie, he was at my class that I took out in Wisconsin, and I got to know him, and I didn't even think about the health benefits of hempcrete until I met him. And he told his story. He tells it on the Bring It Home movie about his daughter who has chemical sensitivity syndrome and had seizures all the time. And so he was looking for a way to solve that problem as an architect. And what he had found was that it was her indoor air environment that was making her sick, that was causing her seizures. She had some other deeper health issues, but the one that was causing the seizures was determined to be indoor air environment specifically. So he sought out industrial hemp and started finding ways to use it to make a more healthy indoor air system. The first reason it's healthier is because it is a plant product. It's bio-based. But the breathability is what really provides its health benefits, because it's less likely to gather molds and things like that. And you don't need the fancy ventilation type systems that we're putting inside of our houses. The reason we have to have these big ventilation systems is to dry out the moisture from our cooking, our sweating, all that stuff puts moisture into the air. So we got to dry that out so it doesn't mold on the walls. And in Midwest areas and more moisture areas, they really have to concern themselves. We don't have as much problem in Colorado with the molds and things, but it does exist, and hemp is better for that. Anyway, so after we build this thermal wall system, we let it dry. It hardens up. It gets fairly hard in just a few days, but then over time it gets harder and harder and harder, and keeps sequestering carbon over time, and actually starts to turn back to stone. The lime is essentially limestone, crushed up seashells and things like that are in different forms, and they're burned a little bit to get to the stage of where we need them to have the binding capability that we need. So really, the other thing that we're trying to do as environmentalists, we want to save the planet with hemp, right? Is that what everyone wants to do? I applaud that, but I really hate to disappoint you. You will not save the planet with hemp. You might save the people, and I'm stealing this from Steve Allen because I like it so much. I'm making it my own little thing, but you might save the people. The planet's going to be fine after humans are long dead and gone, and we've polluted our planet so bad that it's no longer suitable for humans. The planet will still exist, and it will eventually come back. But we need to save us. Now, in the process, we've got to clean up the planet, because that's what's going to save us. So anyway, we want to have less embodied energy into our buildings. And we don't really talk about this term. You're starting to hear it in the alternative building industry more and more. You hear a lot in Europe and around the world, which they catch on, especially environmental issues. We tend to want to try to forget them here in the United States. But at least there's small groups of us like here today that are kind of committed to doing it a little bit different. And as we talk about it more, and as we build homes out of hemp, and we invite our friends to come and stay in a much more comfortable dwelling, then the idea will catch on. And if we can make it eventually even more cost effective than building a standard house, then more people will make that decision. So, yeah, so we got our thermal wall system, and we can finish it in different ways. I've just done some stucco samples, mixing different limes and clays and things like that to come up with something that works well here in Colorado. So the outside can be a standard stucco. You can put siding on it, but it's not quite as the siding will burn. So I'd rather see you do stucco because it'll resist the fire a little bit more. Now on the inside, it can be just about anything. You can make it look very much like drywall, but it's really suited to an older world style of plaster, like what's on the bottom here. Like what you would find in the Sistine Chapel, or where many great artists' works are. They're done on a lime-based plaster. So lime plasters have been around since the beginning of time. In fact, the Romans were the first to, experimenting with it to make their stuff harder and more cementous. On the top here, I've gotten creative with a few rocks. You can put glass pieces in there, or bottles, or whatever. And this is a hemp textured plaster. So I've used some of the hemp to give me the texture that I might desire in the house. So you can be entirely creative depending on more so your plaster guy and your ideas than anything. It allows for great creativity because you can make it round or form it into different, all kinds of different things. It doesn't have to be as flat like this. You can be creative with it as well. Or in the future, we're working on bigger systems to be able to install this in the bigger type facilities. And if you do a little bit of research online, you'll find some of the bigger projects. Now, the more known one is called the Adnams Brewery in the United Kingdom, and they built with hemp. Okay, and they used some hempcrete in some areas. They used a lot of hemp blocks and things like that. But they built like a football-sized field storage facility for their beer. And they have a real environmentally conscious business model. And they decided to do this, but they're claiming that they're saving several $100,000 a year in utility bills because they're able to keep that constant temperature. And the more suitable example for what we do is something that was built out of hempcrete in Europe. That was a big project. It was done by the Wine Society, and so they're storing wine and they need a constant temperature, and they're saving I don't have the exact numbers on what they save a year, but it's significant on a hempcrete system. So you might want to build out of blocks, but what we're doing is we really are building the whole nest. We're going to do the floor system, we're going to do the walls, we're going to do the roof, and we're going to create this envelope that surrounds us in a bio-based, healthy material that actually breathes. And it's going to take on that heat in a passive solar fashion, and it's going to release it back to us better at night. So almost no heating and cooling in a structure like this that is faced correctly to the sun. If you get it right at solar south, then that's when you're going to get the most benefit from that sun. You're going to want to limit your windows on the east and the west side. You're going to want some there so you can see out and look at the view or whatever, but you're going to want to limit them. And hardly any windows on the north side, all of them on the south side. And if you do that here in Colorado, the sun is free energy. And if it gets 12 below, it's probably a good idea to have a wood stove or something like that to, take the chill off if it gets, bitter cold for a few days. But you'll cut your energy bills and increase the amount of days that you're comfortable in your home. Well, anyway, that kind of takes you through the process of what we do to get it like this. And so I'd like to see if anybody has any questions. And then in a few minutes here, we're going to head over to my booth.